Okay, I hope everyone's well. And obviously, yesterday the government said, in terms of the exams, we're going to be using a little bit of teacher assessment and mock results, and also what you got for your GCSEs. It's really important, therefore, that we finish off the content of the course. And as we can't go out and do anything interesting, then we might as well just crack on with the course and get it done. And I suggest that we carry on working to what would normally be the Easter holidays and perhaps get it all done for Easter weekend. All we've got to do is finish off the Republican Party and do pressure groups essentially. So we might as well crack on with it. So this session is going to be on the factions within the Republican Party. I won't say complicated, but that's what it is a little bit. Normally I'd do an A3 sheet like I did for the Democrats. Obviously, I can't send an A3 sheet down the ether to you, but I will send the A4 sheet. That you can type in there to do this. There's a PowerPoint on this, and what I'm going to do basically in this session is go over that PowerPoint. Okay, so I suggest you listen to this in conjunction with the PowerPoint. So, on the first slide of the PowerPoint, then, it's got the broad areas of agreement within the Republican Party. Yes, there are factions within it, but just like with the Democrats, they do tend to agree on certain key things, or most of them do. So, the broad areas of agreement, as you can see on the slide, they tend to have a negative view of the state. They tend to be quite individualistic. They tend to support lower taxation. They tend to be tougher on crime. And the Republican Party tend to want to restrict, and some even want to remove a woman's right to choose to have an abortion or not. So that is kind of the general kind of areas of agreement within the Republican Party. Now, in terms of factions on slide 3, it's like a bit of a summary. There's three main caucuses within the Republican Party. That's groupings within Congress of the Republicans, and they're in dark red. So you've got the Main Street Partnership, which is your moderate Republicans, the more towards the centre, and as we'll see, they tend to overlap with the Blue Dog Democrats. The largest group is the Republican Study Committee, which is where most Republicans are kind of located. And then on the right, you've got the Freedom Caucus, which is kind of popularly known as the Tea Party group. Now, underneath, in a lighter shade of orange, I've put on here fiscal conservatives, social conservatives, and libertarians. Basically, fiscal and social conservatives, you'll find some of them within the Republican Study Committee. You'll find some of them within the Freedom Caucus and the other one within the Mainstream Partnership. And basically, the more extreme fiscally conservative you are, the more towards the right you'll be, and you'll probably be on the right Republican Study Committee or even on the Freedom Caucus. And the more moderate you are with the fiscal conservative views you have, the more kind of towards the centre you'll be. And the same for social conservatives. So the more socially conservative you are, the more likely you are to be in the Freedom Caucus or on the right, if you like, of the Republican Study Committee. And the more moderate you are on social conservatism, the more towards the centre you are. And then the Libertarians, they're mainly in the Freedom Caucus. They tend to be kind of quite extreme fiscals, generally speaking. So let's go through these ones. So we'll do the Mainstream Partnership group first. So these are the ones who are mainly on the political centre of politics. They're kind of on the left, if you like, of the Republican Party. They do have quite a lot of similarities in some ways to some, not all, Blue Dog Democrats. So their main ideas is they see themselves being solution-orientated fiscal realists, which is a bit of a mouthful for meaning that they're quite pragmatic, I suppose. They see the realities that you need to spend money for the state, etc., etc. So they are quite pragmatic. They're quite pragmatic as well about other issues as well. They're the group of Republicans most willing to compromise with some Democrats if needs be. Many of them supported tax cuts. They do support a smaller role of the state in the economy, like all Republicans. But as I said before, they are quite pragmatic and are willing to adapt if needs be. They tend to be the most socially liberal as well. So the odd Republican who is pro-choice, they tend to be located within this grouping. In terms of the strength within the Republican Party today, well, at one time they were a really powerful group, and you could argue they still show some power because most Republican candidates for the presidency, with the exception, I would say, of Trump, have actually come from the Mainstream Partnership or this kind of area. So, for example, people like Mitt Romney in 2012, and there was a bit of a fiscal conservative. He was quite pragmatic and would probably have been quite happy within this grouping. I wouldn't say he was an extreme. John McCain in 2008, again, I wouldn't call him an extreme either. He would probably be quite happy to have been associated with many in these groupings. George W. Bush, at the time everyone thought he was quite extreme, but in today's politics, not. Again, I suspect he might be quite happy within this grouping. So many Republican candidates to the presidency tend to be in this group. Currently in the House, 46 House members say that they caucus within this group, so they're not a massive group. 4 senators as well are former members of this grouping as well. Many of this group, though, lost out to the Tea Party because in the primaries, the Tea Party kind of targeted people from this group to replace them with kind of stricter conservatives. So that's what's kind of happened to them. If you want an example of someone from this group, it is, let's bring her up, Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia. Now, from what we know before, we know the other senator for West Virginia is Joe Manchin, the Democrat, the Blue Dog Democrat. So West Virginia has got a Blue Dog Democrat and they've got a fairly moderate Republican senator as well. So they probably share quite a lot of things in common with each other, which again suggests that the state of West Virginia, though it always votes Republican, is fairly kind of moderately Republican in its views, possibly. Anyway, you can see in the slide some bits about her, but basically she was one of 3 Republican senators to vote against getting rid of Obamacare. She supported, well, she didn't like Trump's replacement of it, so she wanted to keep the current Obamacare system. She's one of 3 Republican senators who said she supports Roe v. Wade, i.e. a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. She has a bit of a mixed record on LGBT rights. Okay. She's against arming teachers, and she's expressed concern during Trump's election campaign about his tone and rhetoric. So she's not really a great fan of Trump in that respect. She has to be a little bit careful, though, because Trump's quite popular in West Virginia. So she's a fairly moderate Republican, and as I said before, quite a lot of these things she has in common with Joe Manchin, who's the Democrat senator for West Virginia. So it kind of shows this is where the state is regarding senators. Okay, the next group is the Republican Study Committee, and they're a mixture of fiscal conservatives and social conservatives. Some of them will be on the right of the Republican Study Committee. The more right you go with that committee, the more extreme the fiscals are and the socials, and the more left on that committee, the more towards the moderate end for those groups. There's quite a spectrum of views within this group. And the social and fiscals have often opposed each other on various things. Now, this committee is the largest group within Republicans, 121 out of 199 House members, so they really dominate in terms of members of Congress, although the 0 senators I noticed actually formally aligned with them, though quite a few of them will share quite a few of their ideas. Right, so talking about the fiscal conservatives first of all, as I said, some of these groups are in the mainstream partnership group. Most of them are in the previous group which we were talking about, which is the study committee group, and then 1 or 2 of them on the more extreme end will be in the Freedom Caucus. Their main ideas, fiscal means money and spending, so their main view is that free market economics rules, essentially. They don't like state intervention in the economy, and they want that as limiting as much as possible. So a small state with regards to the economy. They're against or dislike much of government's regulations in the economy. In terms of social welfare, they're not great fans of it. They don't like affirmative action, for example, that's the state intervening in the economy. They're not a great fan of Obamacare because they say it being expensive, and why should the state be providing kind of health coverage for people? Some of these groups support a balanced budget as a constitutional amendment, so what they want is the constitution to be amended to say that the government must live within its means, basically, and have a balanced budget every year. You can see where you might have problems with that, like at the moment with the current crisis, where the government's having to spend loads of money in order just to keep things going. And they also support a smaller state, and they also believe that should be extended to other areas as well. So, for example, like gun restrictions should be fairly limited. Why is the government intervening in people's lives in terms of guns and other social things as well? So, free market, limited state intervention in the economy, and a dislike of social welfare. As I said, there are extremes with this group. So, the more extreme people on the fiscal conservatism but want to cut back on welfare a lot more than those kind of at the moderate end of social conservatism. Those more at the extreme end of fiscal conservatism want to kind of cut taxes a lot more than those at the more moderate end. So there is a bit of a spectrum within this group. Within the Republicans today, most Republicans see themselves as being fiscally conservative to a large or smaller extent. So you'll get moderates who have the moderate end of this, and you have the more extreme end who kind of want to go quite radically down this path. The next slide shows you two examples. One is the former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. Now, he's no longer in Congress. However, the reason why I've kept him in is that he's a clear kind of fiscal conservative from the near past, and the fact he was a Speaker kind of suggests how fiscal conservatism is quite powerful in the Republican Party. He had a budget plan in 2012 which he wanted to cut spending and balance the budget in 10 years. He supported something called the Pro-Growth Budgeting Act of 2013, which basically would have given much more kind of control over Congressional Budget Office. Currently, Senator Rand Paul, I've put down about to sneeze. Currently, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, I would say, is a fiscal conservative. He's also a bit of a libertarian as well. To give you some idea of his positions, on his first day in Congress, he proposed a bill which would cut $500 billion from the federal budget. So, most people on the first day are kind of, finding out where the desk is and all the rest of it. But he introduces a bill to cut $500 billion from the federal budget. So that kind of suggests where he is. He supported the federal shutdown in 2013, and then he opposed the $43 billion of cuts that were agreed with Obama in order to reopen the government. He wanted the cuts to be a lot greater. Again, the fact Obama had to agree to these $43 billion of cuts, thanks to the Republican Party, again shows how cutting spending is quite an important feature for Republicans. Okay, social conservatives. This grouping was really born in the 1970s largely, and it's a response to the sexual liberation in the 1960s. And what this group believe in is that strong moral values are needed. Society, they say, is going wrong, and it's largely because people are kind of have less moral standards, etc., etc. They strongly oppose abortion. They want to reverse Roe versus Wade, which legalized abortion in the 1970s. They want to protect the home as well against immoral influences. So they quite favour things like parental chips being put into TVs, so parents can kind of screen out certain programs which they don't want their kids to watch, which might be immoral. They also want to reverse a Supreme Court case called Engel versus Vitale, which declared that school prayer in schools was actually unconstitutional because the Constitution states about separation of church and state, and therefore the Supreme Court said that compulsory school prayer was unconstitutional. This group don't like that. They want school prayer to be kind of reinstated as a compulsory element within schools. And of course, they don't like gay marriage and they want to reverse Obergefell versus Hodges. Some in this group as well want to do things like have a constitutional amendment to declare that marriage is between a man and a woman. So this group are concerned about your morals, basically. They do so from a religious point of view, a Christian point of view. Many of the evangelicals who support the Republican Party, they are social conservatives. Now, the strength in the party today, Republican presidents often appoint people with kind of social conservative ideas onto the Supreme Court, or people, those get asked, their views on abortion and stuff, and all the conservative judges on the Supreme Court, or most of them anyway, have kind of voted to restrict abortion rights, or certainly not extend them. The current Vice President, Mike Pence, is a social conservative, and Natasha going to do later on You can see some of his views, which show the influence of social conservatism on his thinking. And many Republican supporters, especially those from the South, identify strongly with this group. So the Republican Party get around about 80% of the evangelical votes. The evangelicals in America, they're kind of people that go to Christian church at least once a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. Roughly 80% of that group vote for the Republican Party, and they like these ideas about social conservatism. And of course, because the Republican Party get their votes, then obviously they're quite keen to court and maintain these votes, so hence their support for these things. Just like with fiscals, though, you get some more moderate social conservatives and some more kind of extreme social conservatives. To give you 2 examples on the next slide, you've got the former Speaker of the House, John Boehner. He, I would say, is a social conservative. In the 112th Congress, he stated that his highest priority was to pass a no taxpayers funding for abortion act, which kind of made fairly clear where he was. The current majority leader in the House, Mitch McConnell, in this COVID-19 fiasco, or crisis, or whatever you want to call it, in the stimulus package which was introduced into the Senate on Monday, just gone, so last week, what was that, like the 15th of March or whatever, he tried to introduce, I'm not sure how successful he was, but he tried to introduce some clauses to say none of this stimulus money will be used towards abortion, basically. The other example upon here is Senator Tom Coburn of Oklahoma. Oklahoma is just north of Texas, in the middle of the United States, quite strong in terms of social conservatism in that area. He has sponsored a number of bills in Congress to limit abortion rights. In 1996, he sponsored the Defense of Marriage Act, which prevented the federal government from recognising same-sex marriage. Obviously, since that date, under Obama, that's been repealed or whatever. But it kind of shows where he is on these issues. And again, in the next task I'm going to give you, you'll see his other senator for Oklahoma. Can't wait to first. I think John Lankland, I think he's called, or something like that. It's on your next task anyway, and you can see what his views are on these particular areas. And of course, you can see, can't you, where there might be a clash between these 2 groups. So, fiscal conservatives, small state regulation, and they're concerned with the economy. This group, though, are more concerned about social morals, and of course, that leads to a bit of a clash, doesn't it? Because does that not require a larger state, to basically intervene in people's bedrooms? So you can have a clash here, and many Republicans are kind of a mixture of these 2 groups. So they kind of, you'll get many Republicans, as we'll see from the next test I'm going to give you, will have some social conservative beliefs, but also some fiscal conservative beliefs. And there's a bit of a clash between the 2, which is why it's quite hard to say, well, these Republicans are social and these Republicans are fiscal, because actually they're all a bit of a mixture, and it's like a judgment call as to which side you think dominates with that particular group. So John Boehner, for example, the speaker I mentioned before, he does have these strong social conservative views, but he also has some quite strong fiscal conservative views as well. It's a mixture of the 2. And again, in essays, which you may have to write for the exam, who knows, or whatever, it's fine to say that. Say, well, these politicians are mainly fiscal conservatives, but they also have some social conservative views as well. People are not that black and white in their beliefs, are they? We all have slight contradictions, and we all kind of lean one way or the other. So you just have to make a judgment as to which one. I mean, I would say Mike Pence was fairly obviously a social conservative, but he does have some fiscal conservative views as well. Okay, the final caucus within Congress is much more recent, I would say. This is what they've kind of been known as the Freedom Caucus. They're made up mainly of the so-called Tea Party movement, which you may have heard about. The Tea Party movement, you're going to watch a video on this. I'll send you the link. It didn't used to be on YouTube, but I discovered last Thursday or Wednesday that it was actually on YouTube. So I'll tell you the link, and there's some questions in your booklets from this. But basically, the Tea Party, they kind of came as a response to the George Bush presidency and also the Obama presidency. Now, they were unhappy about Obama and things like Obamacare, but perhaps not too surprised because he was a Democrat. but they were also unhappy increasingly with the government of George W. Bush. They felt that George Bush hadn't been kind of fiscally conservative enough, supporting things like No Child Left Behind, for example, were kind of early warning signs. They also felt that Bush wasn't kind of social conservatively enough either. So the Freedom Caucus were kind of reaction to this, and they basically felt that the leadership of the Republicans had either gone too moderate or too moderate, basically. They're a mix of the more radical fiscal conservatives, so those who really want to cut back on the state, and also you get a mix of some social conservatives as well, who kind of believe that there should be more restrictions on against things like gay marriage and things like that. And the Republicans have always had a sprinkling of libertarians, those who believe in very small state, and kind of all those areas. So they're a bit of a mixture of extreme fiscals, extreme social conservatives, and then the sprinkling of libertarians. And again, the contradictions which are evident in the previous group is also evident within this group as well. They do tend to be much more ideological. So whereas the mainstream partnership are quite pragmatic and willing to work with Democrats, for example, this group are not. They are very ideological. They're unwilling to compromise, often from within their own party as well. They were quite significant, I would say, in making sure that the former Speaker John Boehner, was kind of ousted. And I suppose they're also involved in Paul Ryan's downfall as well, largely. So they often don't like their own leadership of the Republicans as well, and they're less willing to kind of compromise. Currently, if I've got this right, there are 33 House members in this group, so they're quite a small group. They're quite small and quite vocal, I would say. As I said, they did contribute towards the downfall of former Speaker John Boehner. They also unseated a number of more moderate Republicans. And then I put Trump question mark, because in some respects Trump echoes some views from this group, although not all of them. So, and you're going to do a task like another task you did for Obama, where he was on the spectrum of Democrats. Well, you're going to do something similar on Donald Trump, and you can make your own judgment as to whether he's a Freedom Caucus or whether he's a bit more moderate. The next slide has some examples of I call them Tea Party victims. So what they did in the primaries for congressional seats, the Tea Party challenged moderate Republicans and basically tried to replace them with a Tea Party person. They basically ran adverts against moderates and saying, "Did you know that your Republican has voted with the Democrats so many times? We want to have a proper Republican. He's only a Republican light, etc., etc." I put some examples on here. So you've got Senator Richard Murdoch, for example. Senator Richard Lugar from Indiana, a very, very kind of safe kind of Republican state. Richard Lugar been in Congress a long time. He's been a senator for decades. Quite a moderate, old-fashioned type of Republican. He had supported the Democrats on certain issues. Anyway, Richard Murdoch, this Tea Party guy, challenged him in the primaries, made sure he got the Republican base quite excited by his candidacy. He then defeated him in the primaries, so then it became a choice of Richard Murdoch, the Tea Party Republican candidate, versus the Democrat. In the election campaign, Murdoch said that life, even if it came from rape, was a gift from God, and therefore abortion should be banned under all circumstances. And as a consequence, the Democrats actually won the election in Indiana. The Republicans have just got back that seat last November. The other example I wrote down is Eric Cantor. Now, he represented an area of Virginia. It's actually where my sister lives, just north of Richmond, which is the main city of Virginia, apart from Washington, D.C., I suppose. He was actually a very strong fiscal conservative. He was actually a senior member of the Republican leadership as well in Congress. However, Dave Bratt, a Tea Partier, he basically said that Eric Cantor was a bit too soft and should be tougher. Dave Bratt managed to defeat Eric Cantor in the primaries. And then Dave Bratt actually won the seat in 2012 and was the Republican representative for this area of Virginia up until 2018. The Democrats have now got that seat. Other groups of Republicans, because although the his other specification mentions those three groups. There's actually lots of other groups. There's kind of lots of splinters within Republicans. I'm not going through every single one, but just to give you an idea of two others, you've got the Libertarians, who I mentioned before. They're a bit like the Tea Party, I suppose. They're a small but fairly noisy group. They generally believe in the abolition of all or most of the federal government. They really want to go back to 1787, where the federal government were just responsible for things like war and defence, essentially. Again, you get more extreme groups of this. Some people in this group want to get rid of most of the government, for example, but also where they have a big contradiction with social conservatives, they also, many libertarians, believe the government should not be involved in people's bedrooms, so they're quite happy or quite accepting of kind of people basically doing what they like. Many of them are now in the Tea Party, Freedom Caucus, part of the Republicans. He wanted an example of one. Ron Paul, who's the daddy of Senator Rand Paul, he actually stood as a Libertarian candidate in many Republican primaries. He never really got very far, though he did get a small but significant percentage of the vote every time he did this. And the other group I've highlighted are the neoconservatives. What this refers to is mainly about foreign policy, and these are Republicans who are perhaps the most hawkish members of Republicans regarding foreign policy. So those who are really keen to kind of project American values, use American military to protect American interests and extend them abroad. Again, they sprinkle, I suppose, throughout the other factions. So you might get a fairly moderate Republican in many areas, perhaps on the mainstream partnership, who might actually also be quite radical, quite neoconservative in foreign policy. You might get a social conservative in the mainstream partnership, but he also, or she also, might have very strong neoconservative views in terms of foreign policy. I've put some examples down on here for you. I would say the former President George Bush, in many respects, was fairly moderate, especially in today's Republican Party, but I would say he was a neoconservative regarding foreign policy. The late Senator John McCain as well. Again, in the modern Republicans, you class him as being fairly moderate. However, because he did, for example, vote against Trump's repeal of Obamacare. But there again, in terms of foreign policy, he was quite keen to say that we should use troops abroad and criticise the Obama administration when they didn't really do this. And then, of course, former Vice President Dick Cheney, who is George Bush's Vice President. I think it's pretty clear that he's on this faction or within this group. How strong under Trump is unclear. I put on the PowerPoint, less influential under Trump, question mark. In many ways, Trump has kind of argued that he wants to kind of rein back American power, remove troops from various bits, think about what happened with Syria, and basically saying that Turkey can now look after their own in kind of that bit of Syria, and American troops are coming home. So in those respects, he's not a neoconservative because he wants to kind of return American troops home, not get involved in foreign conflicts. But on the other hand, under Trump, he's done things like, was it that big not nuclear, that new big bomb thing which he used in his first few weeks in Afghanistan. And actually, haven't I just heard this weekend something about America now tested some supersonic missile or something? So I think they're not as strong as under Trump. I won't say Trump was a neoconservative, although he is quite willing to use American force where it's needed, or wanted or not wanted, or you know what I mean. Okay, the last two bits then, I just, as I did with the Democrats, I was just trying to think of similarities and differences between the US. I should put UK there, not US. The UK Conservative Party and US Republican Party regarding factions. Again, in case it ever came up as a 12 marker, who knows? It's worth just trying to think of some similarities and differences between the two parties regarding factions. So the next slide is just a quick reminder about the UK Conservative Party faction. So basically, as we all know, from what happened last year, Europe is the big cause of division. The European Research Group, which Rees-Mogg and co are involved in, was almost a party within the Conservatives. They had their own whipping system, apparently, for their members. They took their own views about May's Brexit deal, for example. Again, in many ways, a bit like a traditional caucus within a party in Congress. There are also other factions as well, aren't there? So you've got the One Nation Conservatives, who tend to be more pro-European, and then you have the more Thatcherite who I suppose are really European Research Group people largely. In terms of similarities and differences then, so as you can see, I thought of 4 similarities between the UK Conservatives and Republicans regarding factions. Again, I think it'd be quite a hard question to make this as a comparison, but I did think of 4. The first one's quite obvious, that both parties do have factions and divisions within them. You could say that the members of both parties, so Republican members or supporters of the Republican Party and supporters stroke members of the Conservative Party in the UK, tend to be more conservative than the establishment of their party, generally speaking. Hence why the Tea Party have managed to do quite well at replacing some fairly moderate Republicans, for example. In terms, the next one's about the Freedom Caucus is essentially a party within a party, and you could say the European Research Group is similar in the UK in terms of structure, if not practicing beliefs. And some representatives of both parties clearly have been threatened with deselection. So if you think about it, like a Boris didn't to get rid of, basically, deselected all those moderate conservatives, for example. People like Ken Clarke and Nicholas Soames, and the other guy, Gork, can't remember his first name. They were essentially, well, they kicked out the party, weren't they, and deselected, which you might say has some similarities to the Tea Party in using the primaries to try and get rid of people like Eric Cantor of Virginia and Richard Lugar of Indiana. So they're kind of your similarities, which I could kind of come up with. In terms of differences, a bit less successful. I've got 2 big differences, really. I put most factions within the Republicans are more organised and formal than within the Conservative Party. So, if the question was explain the differences in factions between the two, then obviously you'd highlight more the fact that the caucuses within the Republicans in Congress are much more strict and much more kind of structured, whereas many of the caucuses within the Conservative Party are kind of less kind of strict and whatever. And you probably mention the One Nation Conservatives. You'd probably downplay a little bit the ERG because it will kind of weaken your view slightly. Factions within the Conservative Party are mainly over one issue, which is Europe, whereas for the Republicans, they tend to be over a range of issues. So even during the crisis of the May years, the Conservatives were divided all over the place, weren't they, on Europe, but on the odd time other legislation was put before the Conservative in that Parliament. Most Conservatives did agree with Theresa May and supported Theresa May's policies. So the issue with the Conservatives is mainly of that one issue, whereas for the Republicans it's over a much greater range. It's over economics, it's over social factors, etc., etc. And one which I haven't put on the PowerPoint, which I've just thought of, is that you could say under Boris, there's now fewer divisions within the Republicans within the Conservatives, because now he's got rid of, essentially, most of those more moderate Conservatives, and he made all the Conservative candidates before the 2019 election kind of sign a pledge or whatever to say that they support Boris's Brexit deal. I suppose you could say that post-2019, the Conservatives in the UK are far less divided than they were before the general election, where the divisions within the Republican Party are still in place. So that is the stuff on the factions. There's quite a lot there. I go through it slowly, write up those PowerPoint slides. If I were you, I'd keep stopping and pausing my yabbiting on, so you can do all that and make sure you understand all those differences. What I'd like to do for next week, I'll probably do another one of these. I might do it on either do it Monday or Tuesday. Is what I want to do between now and then is I'm going to send you a thing on Republican people. And what I would basically done in class normally, I have these laminated cards with like Rand Paul on and various other people. I've then got a number of policies which they kind of support and ideas which they support. And what I normally get people to do is to say which of those ideas and policies suggest that they are socially conservative, which of those ideas and policies suggest they might be fiscally conservative, and then for you to then come to a judgment as to where you think that person is. Like I said before, most people in Republicans are a bit social and a bit fiscal, but for some of them it tends to tilt a bit more one way or the other. You don't need to write down all their policies. It's just so in the exam you could say, well, this person is largely from a social conservative view because they support this, or this person is mainly can be seen as a fiscal conservative because they support that. It just gives you some idea about these people. So once you do that for Tuesday, I'll also send you the link for the Tea Party video as well. It's an hour long. It's Andrew Neil. It's quite good. The very last bit you don't need because this was done before the 2012 elections. I think maybe even done in 2010. It's been done a while now. So they kind of speculate what's going to happen in the 2012 kind of presidential election at the end, which you don't really need because obviously we know what happens. But if you want to listen to it, then you can do. So you need to watch that video, do the questions in the booklet, and then you should be fairly up to date with that. And then what I'll do on Tuesday, I'll have a little chat to you again, and we'll do some work on where's Trump within the Republican Party, and we'll look at who votes for the Republican Party and why. We'll make sure all that is sorted. And then we're almost done with parties then. There's something else I need to do, which I can't remember off the top of my head, just to kind of bring it all together. And then we'll do pressure groups the week after. And if we do the week after that, which would normally be the Easter holidays, up until kind of Easter week, then we've done all the content then, haven't we? Okay then, so I'll send that stuff out to you. And for those of you who missed lessons earlier this week about the Democrats and their factions and divisions, I'll do one of these in about half an hour on that.